In the previous episode, we saw how Leping was waiting for Elizabeth, and finally, the door opened. Leping's face lit up with excitement. Elizabeth's back, he thought, rushing to the door. But to his disappointment, it was Holy Sword Alpha and Wang Kai. Up next, Alpha carried a load of meat into the room and asked Leping, "Should I put this in the refrigerator as usual?" Leping thanked him with a somber expression, lost in thought. Could it be? Has Elizabeth truly left? Before his thoughts could spiral further, Elizabeth suddenly teleported in front of him, grabbing a piece of bread from the table. Taking a bite, she casually remarked, "This is really good." Hearing her voice, Leping froze, stunned. He looked up to confirm what he was hearing and saw Elizabeth standing there. She was back. Blushing slightly as she continued eating, Elizabeth asked, "Well, do you have any comments?" Internally, she couldn't help but feel a sense of triumph. It seems Leping has already dealt with that enchantress. There's no reason for me to feel embarrassed about returning. Leping stood quickly, his face a mixture of confusion and relief. "I thought you were upset about what happened this morning, so you didn't want to come back." Elizabeth smirked and replied, "I'm not so petty." Though outwardly composed, she felt a twinge of satisfaction, recalling how she had secretly seen Leping crying alone over her departure. Leping, however, remained nervous and at a loss for words, leaving the atmosphere awkwardly tense. Suddenly, something shifted within Elizabeth's chest. Moments later, a tiny, adorable dragon peeked out, drawn by the smell of Leping's food. "Elizabeth, what is this?" Leping asked, his confusion deepening. Handing a small piece of bread to the dragon, Elizabeth explained, "This is Amelia, the golden dragon you encountered in the treasure vault. She's also my mount." Leping's eyes widened in shock. Wasn't she the little girl? How did she turn into this? Elizabeth's expression turned somber. "It's because of the Dark Guild. When I rescued her, I found she had lost all her memories. I used magic to return her to a childlike state to stabilize her condition. But even then, I couldn't recover anything. The mastermind behind it all has disappeared entirely. That's why I need your help to restore Amelia's memories." Leping's heart sank at her words. "So Elizabeth isn't as indifferent to the world as I thought. She's been fighting against the Dark Guild all along. Meanwhile, I, the so-called legendary hero, have done so little in comparison." He lowered his head and said earnestly, "This is all my fault. If I had done my job properly, Amelia wouldn't have ended up in this situation." Elizabeth shook her head. "Now's not the time to dwell on blame. What matters is helping Amelia recover her memories." However, Elizabeth misinterpreted Leping's apology as something deeper. Is he apologizing because of what happened this morning? Could it be, he actually likes me? Meanwhile, Alpha and Wang Chaihua, who had been listening nearby, spoke up. "Leping, I have experience in recovering memories," Alpha offered confidently. Leping turned to him, hopeful. "You do? What's your plan?" Elizabeth crossed her arms, skeptical. "Are you serious? Or are you just wasting our time?" Alpha gave a reassuring smile. "Trust me. Leave it to us." He whispered something to Wang Kai, who nodded in agreement. The group moved to the living room, where Leping sat across from Alpha. "So, what's your plan?" he asked. Alpha grinned. "Simple. Let us handle it." He and Wang Kai suddenly turned to Amelia, adopting fearsome expressions in an attempt to frighten her. Amelia yelped in terror and darted back into Elizabeth's chest. Elizabeth's gaze turned icy as she addressed the two. "That's it? That's your solution?" Alpha, unfazed, replied, "Fear is the best way to recover memories. It worked for me when I—" Before he could finish, Elizabeth summoned a demonic hand and slapped both Alpha and Wang Kai across the face. "If you ever try something so ridiculous again, I'll throw you out of this house," she warned. The two immediately apologized, promising not to repeat their antics. However, Alpha muttered under his breath, "But it really worked for me last time." Elizabeth turned to Amelia, her tone softening. "Don't be afraid. I'll find a way to help you recover your memories." At that moment, Leping had an idea. "Follow me," he said, leading them to his farm, where magical fruits grew. Elizabeth glanced around, curious. "What are we doing here?" Leping smiled. "The key to memory lies in the brain. Walnuts are known to nourish the brain, so maybe they'll help Amelia." "Walnuts?" Elizabeth asked, puzzled. I don't recall seeing those among the fruits you've grown. Leping chuckled. That's because I recently made a wish to the fruit tree to grow walnuts. And look, they're ready. Elizabeth watched as Leping harvested a batch of walnuts. You're always full of surprises, she remarked. Then he handed Elizabeth a walnut. Confused, she asked, does this really help with memory? Leping replied confidently, that's what they say in my original world. Without thinking much, Elizabeth took a bite, only to grimace in disgust. These are so bitter and unpalatable, she exclaimed. Seeing her expression, Leping burst into laughter. That's not how you're supposed to eat walnuts, he said, grabbing another one. He cracked it open, revealing the structure inside. What you eat is the kernel inside the shell. Elizabeth was surprised to see the walnut's intricate interior. It looks just like a human brain. How does something like this grow inside a fruit? Leping, you must be a creator of miracles. Leping handed the opened walnut to Amelia and then offered another to Elizabeth. Would you like to try it again? These are still raw walnuts, but if you savor them carefully, you can appreciate their flavor. To Elizabeth, such fruits were ordinary, but she hoped they might be useful to Amelia. As she took a bite, however, she suddenly felt as though an electric shock was coursing through her brain. In an instant, she found herself entering a mysterious realm. She almost forgot about the phenomenon called synchronicity, realizing it had been triggered because Leping ate a walnut at the same time as her. This synchronicity amplified the effect and pulled her consciousness into the realm. Elizabeth looked around, astonished, and realized she was in some kind of movie theater, where memories were being projected onto a screen. But then she heard other noises nearby. Were there other people in this realm? She turned to find multiple other realms, each occupied by different versions of herself. One Elizabeth was watching the memories and yelled, "We already like each other. Is it that difficult to say it out loud? If this were my world of savages, I'd have knocked Leping unconscious with a club and dragged him back to the cave to have children." Another Elizabeth scoffed, "Rude. Not every world is as direct as yours. My husband, Leping, started from the imperial examinations and worked his way to my side through sheer effort before achieving greatness." Realizing the truth, Elizabeth thought, are they all queens from different worlds? A cultivator version of herself added, in my immortal cultivation world, senior brother Leping and I endured 81 trials and tribulations, even defeating the heavenly ancestor demon before we could be together. Yet another Elizabeth from a maritime world chimed in, Leping in my world always aimed high. From the very beginning he wanted to compete with me, declaring he'd become the pirate king someday. She stood up and laughed, saying, in the end, didn't he lose to me? This captain seized the great secret treasure in one fell swoop and became the pirate king, though, to be honest, he probably gave it to me on purpose. Now he can only comfort himself by saying corny lines like, "You are my greatest treasure." Elizabeth, observing the otherworldly Elizabeths, realized it seems that the kings in different worlds have unique ways of interacting with Leping. Yet she was puzzled and wondered, what kind of place is this? An older Elizabeth sitting next to her smiled and explained, "This is the Elizabeth Theater, where you can watch the stories of Elizabeths from other world lines." Curious, Elizabeth asked the older version, "Where are you from?" The older Elizabeth chuckled softly, "I'm just an ordinary Elizabeth from an ordinary world." Elizabeth pressed further, "So how did I get here?" The elder replied, "I don't know the exact details, but every Elizabeth finds her own way here. The only prerequisite is that your relationship with Leping has reached a certain level." Elizabeth's eyes widened in surprise. "Does that mean my relationship with Leping has developed enough? Is that why I'm here?" But the older Elizabeth shook her head. "Not quite. This is just a preview. What you have in your hand is merely a temporary ticket." Suddenly, one of the otherworld Elizabeths shouted, "This Elizabeth is such a fool. Her relationship is progressing way too slowly. So bland, so plain." Hearing the comments, Elizabeth turned to the older version and asked nervously, "Do you think my relationship with Leping is really that bad?" The elder smiled knowingly. "It's hard to please everyone. Remember, every Elizabeth is the protagonist of her own story. Just follow your heart. And speaking of plain relationships, no story can compare to mine in simplicity. Yet, when my story was shared, It made all the other Elizabeths cry their eyes out. Ha ha! Though, to me as an old woman, it's a happy memory. Elizabeth's curiosity was piqued. She leaned in, her excitement barely contained. What kind of story is it? The elder's expression softened as she reminisced. It's just the ordinary life of Leping and me. How we met, fell in love, got married, had children, and grew old together. Hearing this, Elizabeth blushed deeply, her face glowing with both embarrassment and warmth. The older Elizabeth smiled warmly and said, "Even without magic or advanced technology, isn't it a kind of happiness to live a simple life like this?" She continued, "I remember when Leping was just a vegetable vendor, and I was always causing trouble for him. I'd throw tomatoes at his face and laugh, and in return, he'd throw something back at me and tease me. We'd bicker and fight all the time. But one day, while arguing, we accidentally kissed. That was the moment we both realized we were in love." The old Elizabeth's eyes softened with nostalgia. "We got married, lived a happy life together, and had children. We watched them grow up, go to college, and start their own lives. Parents grow old, children move on, but in the end, it was always Leping who stayed by my side. Life is fleeting. It passes in the blink of an eye." Elizabeth listened in awe, absorbing the wisdom of her older self. Suddenly, the screen in the theater lit up with a special broadcast, Leping's inner monologue. The words echoed across the room. "Of course I like you, Elizabeth. If only Elizabeth could be my girlfriend. Elizabeth, please come back to me." Elizabeth froze in her seat, stunned and embarrassed. Are these Leping's inner thoughts? She wondered. It turns out he's loved me for a long time. As the broadcast ended, all the other dimensional Elizabeths jumped to their feet, shouting in unison, "Together! Together!" The broadcast left everyone in suspense. One of the ruder Elizabeths shouted angrily, "This is ridiculous! When will the main story be released? And where's the scene of them making a baby? This clan leader demands to see it now." The Emperor Elizabeth scoffed. "Your focus is always on the bridal chamber. How vulgar. Though I must admit, I'm curious to see how their relationship progresses." Another Elizabeth chimed in. "Come to think of it, Leping is so gentle and kind. It's refreshing to see a story like this. I'm really looking forward to how it all unfolds." Hearing the other Elizabeth's comments, Elizabeth blushed furiously, her face glowing with embarrassment. The older Elizabeth turned to her. "The trailer is over, and your temporary ticket is about to expire," she said gently. "Remember, in every world, Leping and Elizabeth share a unique fate. There's no need to worry. Just follow your heart." Elizabeth opened her mouth to ask what she meant, but before she could say anything, she was pulled back into reality. Back in the real world, Amelia suddenly cried out in pain after eating the walnut. Clutching her head, she whimpered as tears streamed down her face. Leping turned to Elizabeth, panic in his voice. "Elizabeth, check on Amelia. She seems to be in pain. Could she be allergic to nuts?" Elizabeth immediately cast great healing on Amelia to ease her suffering, but instead of helping, the pain intensified. Amelia screamed louder, her cries of agony filling the room. Leping, now visibly distressed, demanded, "What's happening? Why isn't it working?" Elizabeth, though equally worried, tried to stay calm. "Don't overestimate Amelia's endurance," she said cautiously. Leping pressed further, his voice frantic. "Do you have any idea what's wrong with her? Is it really a nut allergy?" Elizabeth looked at Leping and said, "There's no other way now. Amelia has to rely on herself." She thought to herself, Leping used the synchronicity effect of the walnut to help Amelia reopen the memory pathways in her brain. But Amelia lacks the ability to recover or restore lost memories. The vacant memory space is like a puncture in her mind, causing immense discomfort. And as for the mastermind behind this, I've searched the entire world but found no trace. I'm completely helpless. Leping, seeing Amelia's discomfort, apologized. As he approached her, Amelia suddenly began to recall terrifying and painful memories. Her whole body trembled with fear. Meanwhile, at a distant Malfoy estate, a figure smirked as he noticed the original memory being retrieved. The memory was taken back? Could Elizabeth have found this place? Impossible, he muttered. Back at the scene, Amelia, overwhelmed by fear, ran from Leping and clung to Elizabeth, crying, "Save me! before collapsing into unconsciousness against Elizabeth's chest. Shocked, Elizabeth thought, did Leping use the power of the rules to forcibly retrieve Amelia's memory? She frowned. In the past, he had no interest in intervening in such trivial matters. Yet, for my sake, he's made another exception. Leping, realizing what had happened, apologized to Elizabeth. "I'm sorry for scaring Amelia," he said sincerely. Elizabeth shook her head. "It's fine. She can handle this much. I'll send her back to the contract space so she can rest." Leping scratched his head awkwardly. He mumbled. Elizabeth turned to look at Leping. He nervously glanced at her, and for a moment, the air grew silent as they stared at each other. Leping finally broke the tension, straightening his posture and smiling awkwardly. "It's a pretty clear night tonight, don't you think, Elizabeth?" Elizabeth nodded, suppressing a small smile. Behind a nearby wall, Alpha, who had been watching them, whispered to Wang Kai, "In the end, what I did was boring and low-level. What Brother Leping did was truly amazing." Wang Chai chuckled softly. "Can you really compare yourself to your master?" Suddenly, a notification appeared in front of Alpha, flashing ominously. "Call Alpha. Call Alpha. Refusal will be punished. Refusal will be punished." Alpha stumbled, clutching his head in pain as a strange noise echoed through his mind. His head felt like it was about to explode. Wang Chai quickly retrieved a pair of noise-canceling headphones created by Leping and placed them over Alpha's ears. The moment Alpha wore them, the noise ceased, and he fell into a deep sleep. Wang Chai sighed. "If you want to hear noise, wear these next time. But what's wrong with you? My signal receiver isn't picking up anything unusual. Forget it. I'll take you back to the forging workshop for a proper inspection." Meanwhile, Elizabeth turned to leave. "If there's nothing else, I'll be going now," she said to Leping before walking away. Leping stood still, watching her retreating figure. Elizabeth intentionally slowed her steps, thinking to herself, "You stupid Leping, why don't you chase after me? You're so proactive in other worlds." Leping's heartbeat raced as his mind filled with confusion and doubt. "If I don't chase after her, I'll regret it forever," he thought. Embarrassed but resolute, he reached a conclusion. "Even if I get rejected, I don't want to live with regret." Meanwhile, Elizabeth hesitated, her own thoughts swirling. Should I take the initiative? That won't do. But then she reminded herself, Elizabeth and Leping in every world have their unique destinies. Just follow your heart. With that thought, she began preparing a force transmission spell to teleport away. Just as she was about to vanish, Leping called out to her, "Elizabeth." She froze and turned back, her cheeks flushing red as she met his gaze. Leping, equally embarrassed and nervous, stammered, "Didn't you ask me if I liked you?" Elizabeth stared at him in silence, her heart pounding. Leping took a deep breath, struggling to maintain his composure. "Before I knew it, we've been living together for over a year, and in that time, I've come to understand just how big the gap between us is. I'm just a so-called legendary hero who knows nothing about swords or magic. I'm not worthy of you at all, but if I could, I'd want nothing more than to live an ordinary life with you." Elizabeth's brow twitched in irritation as she thought, "Damn it, do you really need to emphasize that you're the creator, as if you're lowering yourself to live an ordinary life with me?" Oblivious to her frustration, Leping continued, his fists clenched. "I'm just a homebody. I have no experience with dating and don't know how to make a girl happy. And because of your status, I've always been too scared to express my feelings." Taking another deep breath, he finally confessed, "But Elizabeth, I love you." Elizabeth's heart swelled, and before Leping could react, she rushed toward him and hugged him tightly. Leping stood frozen, utterly shocked by the unexpected embrace. I didn't think she'd actually accept my confession. Without a word, Elizabeth grabbed him, and with a powerful leap, they soared into the air. She looked at him and said softly, "It's nothing. I'm just following my heart." Leping blinked in confusion. "What do you mean?" he asked. Instead of answering, Elizabeth pulled him closer and kissed him deeply. When their lips finally parted, Leping, still breathless, murmured, "Elizabeth, I really like you." Elizabeth covered her face with her hands, her cheeks glowing red with embarrassment. "I like you too," she admitted quietly. After those heartfelt words, she suddenly used her teleportation spell and disappeared without warning, leaving Leping suspended in midair, 10 feet above the ground. "Wait! Elizabeth!" Leping shouted in panic, flailing helplessly. "How am I supposed to get down from here?"